This is the Nature Journal Workshop, and today we are doing a special program in cooperation with Point Blue Conservation Science. I was connected with Point Blue a long time ago when I started birding. My dad was a lifetime member of the Point Reyes Bird Observatory. And we would regularly head out to the Palomarin Station, and we'd do our birding around there. And then in high school, I was a bit adrift trying to figure out what I liked to do. I kind of liked this nature thing. And my friend John Kelly made an opportunity available for me to participate in a educator training. They had youth interns who would help take people on tours of the Palomarin Field Station, and I participated in one of those trainings and led some trips, and that started my entire career in environmental education. So if it were not for Point Reyes Bird Observatory, which then became Point Blue Conservation Science, I would never have gotten started doing environmental education. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So you guys, we go back a long way, we go deep, and I am so delighted to have you here. Point Blue Conservation Science is an amazing network of researchers and conservationists doing work on birds and ecosystems around the world. And I'm going to introduce you folks to Ann Chadwick, who is on the board of Point Blue and a regular part of the Nature Journal Club. And she will help with introducing this organization that I love. You should love. Hey, you should become a member. Maybe in the link over there, we put a link to that, because it's a great way to, like, if you like what you're seeing here, a really wonderful way to support that is become a member, right? Ann, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's so great to see so many friends from my two favorite communities, nature journaling and conservation science. To me, they go hand in hand. We all share the values of curiosity and deep observation and love of nature. Many of us are turning those values into action, whether through outdoor and science education or stewardship or climate smart conservation. So thanks for all you do, and you people out there who are doing this work, you know who you are. And Jack, he does it all. I mean, he's a national treasure. So thanks, Jack, for having us as guests today. As he said, I'm on the board. In fact, I'm the vice chair of the board of Point Blue Conservation Science. We're a nonprofit with 160 researchers working on nature-based solutions to climate change. Our work ranges from the Sierra to the sea and from Alaska to Antarctica. And I'm so pleased to feature just one aspect of the work that we do. Today, we'll be talking about bird banding and long-term research from the Palomarin Field Station in Northern California. I see several Point Blue folks out there who helped make this event happen. So let me just take a second to thank Bennett Smith in development, Diana Humpel, who runs the field station, among other things, Jamie Lilly and Lishka Arata in communications, and our esteemed CEO, Manny Oliva, and our board chair, Jeff Gordon-Creed. I see several others from our great staff and board and membership, but hey, I don't have time to introduce everybody, so let me get straight to our presenter, Renée Cormier. Renée is an avian ecologist at Point Blue, and her work is focused on intern training at the Palomarin Field Station, plus spotted owl monitoring in Marin, and working on a variety of songbird projects in the Bay Area. As if that weren't enough, she also helps coordinate our oil spill preparedness and response. Renée grew up in New Brunswick, Canada. Shortly after completing her bachelor's degree in science at Acadia University in Nova Scotia, she joined Point Blue as a birding intern at Palomarin, and since then she's worked on a variety of projects through California. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Renée, and I'll be sketchnoting all the way, taking notes, and maybe Jack, you can say a little bit about like what nature journaling is, how it's not all about the pretty picture, it's about our observations and getting down things like, yeah, some pictures, but some words and some numbers and maybe a little bit of that, and then we'll turn it to Renee. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. What I'll do is I'll just change over to this view, and probably the easiest way to tell you is to show you. This is, this is kind of, I'm going to zoom out. Whoa. No, that doesn't work. So this, here's what I'll do. I'm going to go back to you get to see my face view. And here we go. Right. This little book here is a nature journal. And what I do is, as I go rambling around, I use words and pictures and numbers to record my observations about whatever things I'm encountering in nature. And what's neat about this process is that, so here looking at buds developing on trees, here looking at birds. And what happens when you get your observations out of your head and down onto a piece of paper is that this process helps you pay more attention to whatever it is that you're looking at. So if you're, say, a birder and you're looking at birds, part of it you'll remember, but a bunch of it you forget. So you know, notice like you have to learn the same bird song again and 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 again. So, but if you listen and you're transcribing it into here, or you're looking at things and you're putting those discoveries down into a journal by drawing pictures, writing notes, counting, measuring things, your ability to remember goes way up, as does your ability to make observations. So if you are not comfortable drawing, you haven't drawn in a long time, don't worry about that. The drawing actually comes, if you just start doing it on a regular basis, you rewire your brain and you teach it how to draw just by doing this on a regular basis. So it's not about the pretty pictures, it's about paying attention to the world, paying attention to the birds, and being alive, being present in this moment. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look at some research going on at the Palomarin Station, and then we're going to take a really, 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 really close look at golden-crowned sparrows. I'm going to show you some strategies that will help you be able to draw them. And we've also got some specimens from Point Blue, which we're going to be looking at. So that's a little bit about nature journaling, big fun. Don't worry about art. Take notes, anything you think, oh, that's cool. I'm going to put, I'll remember that. No, you won't. Put it down on paper. So get a little notebook and do that now. Renee.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction, Anne and Jack. We appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen here and get us started. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about, as Jack and Anne mentioned, about bird banding and migration studies at the Palomarin Field Station. And Anne talked a little bit about Point Blue, but I'll start by giving you a little bit of more background on the organization. We are a nonprofit organization called Point Blue Conservation Science, and our mission is to conserve birds, other wildlife, and ecosystems through science, partnerships, and outreach. And we were founded in 1965 as the Point Reyes Bird Observatory. Currently, our headquarters is in Petaluma, California, and the majority of our projects are throughout the state of California, but we also have projects throughout the Pacific Flyway from Alaska to Chile, as well as far as Antarctica, studying Adelie penguins. So today I'm going to talk about Point Blue's longest running project at the Palomarin Field Station. And then I'll show you a short video explaining the banding process. And I hear and saw that there were some European folks joining this presentation. You probably know bird banding as ringing. And then after we watch the video, I'll focus on a specific project out of the Palomarin Field Station where we track the migration of the Golden-crowned Sparrow. So the Palomarin Field Station pictured here is the location of Point Blue's longest running project, where we began studying birds and their environment in 1966, just a year after the founding of our organization. We're located in the southern end of the Point Reyes National Seashore, about an hour north of San Francisco. And the defining characteristics of Palomarin at our core are the science, training, and people. We collect data on birds, the local vegetation, and weather to determine how birds are doing over time and how they're impacted by their environment. So for example, the graph at the bottom of the screen shows changes in the number of breeding territories of different bird species since the early 1980s. And the habitat at Palomarin has changed fairly dramatically since the study began, from a quite open coastal scrub habitat to a more forested landscape. And with that, we've seen changes in the bird community with increases in forest-associated species and declining numbers and of those associated more with the open habitats. Palomarin is also a training center for biologists. We offer internships year-round where people can come and learn how to collect these different types of data. And they gain experience in science outreach that Jack mentioned, also while living with a group of peers immersed in the same work. We host thousands of visitors every year, including school groups and drop-in visitors. And during non-COVID times, folks can drop in and watch science in action and join our interns during the bird banding process. So to show you a little bit about the banding process, I'm going to play a video that explains what it is and how we do it. For us, it's a primary method that we used, that we have been using since 1966 to track trends in local bird populations. And by catching and individually marking birds, we can dive even farther into monitoring bird populations and start to understand a little bit more about their demographics. So things like the survival and reproductive success. With those types of data, we can answer questions like, if species A is declining, what might be the reasons? Is it that they're not producing as many young as they used to? Are they not surviving or staying around as long? And we can also look into things like how changing weather or climate impact things like reproductive success or their survivorship, and so on. So in this video that I'm going to show, it was taken at one of our local study sites in the Bolinas Lagoon Open Space Preserve. I'll just get this going. It's about 4 minutes and then we'll return to presentation mode.
Today we are mist netting or banding birds, and we set up fine mesh or nylon nets along a habitat where we think birds will be crossing. And so it's set up almost like a volleyball net, and the net is so fine that birds don't see it as they're focused on one area beyond the net. The net essentially disappears. That's why they're called mist nets, because it's hard to see. The extraction process can be tricky, especially when you're just learning, but the good thing is that most birds actually end up getting captured the same way. Once you get that pattern down, it can become pretty easy for an experienced bander. The net goes around their wings and their head, and so we can carefully remove that. It's almost like taking off a cardigan. Some birds, like song sparrows, are always very squirmy and feisty. Other birds, many warblers, are very docile and seem calm, or what we would interpret as being very calm in the net. Once we safely extract or remove a bird from our mist nets, then we take it back to a central location where we have various tools and other measuring devices set up. Every bird is banded with a uniquely numbered aluminum band, and that band fits like a little bracelet around the bird's leg, and the bird is then marked for life. So anytime we recatch that bird, we know which individual it is. We then determine the species and the age and sex if possible, and we take a few measurements like the length of the wing and the length of the leg. We blow all over the birds. We're checking for a variety of things. Birds store fat in the furculum or the wishbone area, and it looks yellow compared to their pink or purplish colored skin, and so we can assess how much fat they're storing. We can look for birds in breeding condition. If the females incubate, they get an incubation patch where they lose all of the feathers on their belly so they can warm the eggs develop. By having a bird in the hand that's marked, we get two very important pieces of information. One being the age of that bird, so we can see what's the ratio of young birds to adult birds, and that gives us an indication of how good the reproductive season was. Then also, because the birds are banded and they keep that band for their whole lives, we can actually look at survival of birds over time. And we can link these things to things that are going on in the natural world, big climate patterns and habitat variables. We recently did an analysis of trends in the mist netting data over just the past 11 years, and we found a lot of the populations of songbirds to be relatively stable. And that's great news. A lot of migratory songbirds in particular, but land birds and songbirds all over North America have been declining over recent decades. One might think that doing something like this time and time again could get monotonous, but really banding birds is always, every day is different. You're always catching different birds, different species. When you have a bird in the hand, there's just so many fine details that you might not see through your binoculars. Little unique differences between species, similar species, or even within a species of birds.
Okay. So I'm going to get this presentation going again here. All right, so now that you've learned a little about the banding process, if that was new to you and why we do it, I want to share a little bit about a specific project we've been working on with golden-crowned sparrows. And we're doing this work with a handful of other species, but today I'll focus on the golden-crowned sparrow study. Golden-crowned sparrow is a species we've been monitoring through our long-term banding study at Palomarin. And they're a species that has been slowly declining over the years at our study site. And that is at least likely and partially in response to that changing habitat at the study site that I mentioned. The project that I'll talk about revolves around a question that people have been asking about migratory birds for a very long time. And that is, where exactly do these birds go when they leave here? Besides just being a fascinating fact to learn about these small migrants, understanding where migratory birds go is really important to their conservation. So for example, if a species in our area is declining but only spends 4 months of the year at our study site, we may be able to determine some of the challenges or threats that it faces here, but we're really missing the full picture if we don't understand the challenges they face in other parts of the year. Furthermore, because climate change impacts are not equal everywhere, with some areas experiencing more dramatic temperature changes than others, while another area may experience prolonged droughts or more severe winter storms. And all of these changes will influence birds in different ways depending on where they are. So knowing where a bird goes and knowing the challenges and opportunities in that area can also help us make determinations on how to protect these species. The orange arrow here is pointing to a little tag called a geolocator, and that's helping us to answer that question of where these birds go. First, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about the golden-crowned sparrow in general. You might recognize this bird if you're from Western North America or from other excursions. Named for their crowns, the golden-crowned sparrow individuals, the pattern of each crown can be quite variable among individuals, and the extent of striping. That can be related to age or time of year, often with younger birds having brown and less pronounced stripes than older birds with bolder stripes. But they all do have that golden patch on their forehead. You might also recognize them by their song, which they sing both during the breeding season and during winter. It sounds like a long, melancholy, oh dear me, that's the mnemonic birders use to remember the song. So the golden-crowned sparrow is a migratory species that spends the summers from Alaska south to British Columbia and the mountains of Alberta, Canada. They're found primarily in shrub habitats in the area in blue on the map. And in winter, you can find golden crowns from Southwest Canada to northern Baja, Mexico. Around here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we commonly see this bird flocking in winter, usually arriving by mid-September and staying until about late April. So you still have a few weeks left to see them if you live in the Bay Area. They are common in shrublands here in the winter, as well as in riparian areas, so in habitats along creeks and rivers, and in many of our neighborhoods, often seen flocking with other sparrows. And while we know the winter range and the breeding range in these blue and orange areas on the maps, our question is more specific and something that wasn't easy to learn with songbirds until about 10 years ago, which is within that entire blue area, where do birds from Palomarin go when they leave? Do they all go to the same general area? Do they spread out across the study range? Also, is the wintering area of Palomarin birds different from birds that are wintering in other regions? And so to answer this question at Palomarin and at a nearby study site about 170 kilometers east in the foothills of California, we put tiny geolocator tags on individual golden-crowned sparrows to answer these questions. In the early days of bird banding, people hoped that we would learn this from banding a bird in one location and catching it in another location. But those instances are just really rare. And so really it wasn't until about, as I mentioned, 10 years ago that we've been able to gather this information. So the little green thing next to the penny in the picture on the left is called a light level geolocator tag, or geolocator for short. And the light level geolocator is a very lightweight instrument. It weighs less than a gram. It has a light sensor and a clock. So with those two pieces of technology, that allows us to determine sunrise and sunset times and the length of the day. And because sunrise and sunset and day length vary depending on where you are located geographically, by attaching one of these little tags to a bird, we can determine their location. So we attach these geolocators to birds using a little harness that we place around the bird's legs. It fits kind of like a backpack, but around the upper thighs of the bird. And the light sense sticks out between the wings. So we place these tags on golden-crowned sparrows during the winter, both at Palomarin and in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The birds migrated north to their breeding grounds, and when they returned the next fall, we recaptured them, removed the tag and harness, downloaded the data to our computer, and determined where they went. So then we could compare where birds from Palomarin went, which are represented by the blue crosses here, to the birds from our other site in the foothills, represented by the orange crosses. Each cross represents one individual bird, and the length of the cross shows the general area where they went. With the light level geolocators, our precision where birds go is to about 100 miles or so, which is much more precise than we knew before. We were really excited to see where these birds went, of course, with the Palomarin birds mostly concentrating within about 70 miles of the Gulf Coast of Alaska, while the birds that we tagged at the inland California wintering site mostly went to more interior breeding sites as well. We also found differences between the distances that they traveled. So the Palomarin birds traveled on average about 3,600 kilometers, that's 2,200 miles, between wintering and breeding grounds. So that's just one way, and they do this twice a year for their lifetime. The inland wintering birds traveled approximately 2,400 miles, or 2,400 kilometers, excuse me. So that's about 1,500 miles. In addition to these light level geolocators, we're now also working on a project in collaboration with a UC Davis graduate student, Autumn Iverson, using GPS technology. So GPS, of course, is everywhere. We all have it in the phones in our pockets. And these tags look very similar to the light level tags, and we put them on the birds in the same way with using the same type of harness. But with these GPS tags, the pink line here represents just the track of one bird migrating north. We can, we can zoom in, and the error on these is just a few meters. So the photo on the bottom right shows an overview of where this bird migrated to in Alaska from the Point Reyes National Seashore here in Marin. So I hope today you learned a bit about the importance of and what we can learn from long-term studies, such as our work from the Palomarin Field Station, and a bit about the Golden-crowned Sparrow and some of the newer technology that we're using to expand on our long-term monitoring program. And while we're still currently closed to the public due to COVID, we do hope to start hosting people in person again soon. So please do check our website for information on how to visit and for updates on when we will be open again. But in the meantime, we do have a couple of upcoming online events that I wanted to share. The first is on April 15th. Scientists from Palomarin will be talking about the habitat change at our study area and how the bird community has changed over the course of this study. And on April 21st, you can join the Palomarin interns and their supervisor for a Facebook Live event where you can watch them live as they band birds and talk about breeding birds and spring migration. So thank you so much for joining today. I'm very much looking forward to the next part of this session with all of you and sketching golden-crowned sparrows. So thanks very much. I will stop share here.
Thank you.
Renee, thank you so much for that. The work that Point Blue is doing is really important. For us to be able to make management decisions that are based on evidence, based on data, is really important. It allows us to, we need to be able to understand in order to make appropriate interventions. And just being hands-off and saying, well, they'll work it out on their own. We human beings have a huge footprint on this planet. And knowing if things that we're doing or not doing are causing these declines, we need to know that. So that's absolutely fascinating. I love some of those workarounds, like using day length to figure out your latitude. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. Yeah, Carolyn agrees. So let's do a little bit on drawing these birds, because there may be golden crowns near you, and that will be really fun. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at some photographs, and we've got some study skins. So what study skins are is when scientists have a dead bird, we open it up, we take out all the meat. Sometimes parts of those are studied for things, but then we sew it back up so that we're able later on to study things like the feathers and other aspects of the birds. And here we can use them to kind of get a very close look at the plumage of these birds, which is really useful for us as sketchy people. And Renee, you've got some birds on your desk, right?
Yes, I do, and I'm going to try to share that. Would you like me to share that with you now?
Yeah, why don't we pull that up? So here we have two golden-crowned sparrows.
I can show the golden crown, maybe.
All right, so we're seeing that, but maybe, oh yeah, that view would be great. Just let's take a look at that view one more time. Hold it up and still. All right, so we've got kind of a black lining around that yellow. We see the brown lines kind of coming into it. What you'll hear me doing when I'm looking at a bird is just what I just did. I say out loud whatever it is that I see. That's going to help me get all those points down into the sketches and drawings that I make. What we find tends to happen if you just look at something and they go like, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that, I'm going to draw it. You might remember a few parts of that, but by saying out loud whatever it is that you see, that's going to really help. So it's the yellow spot's shaped a little bit like a house, straight walls coming up to a point, or maybe a circus tent. Yeah, circus tent top, kind of because there's a little swoop up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a few. Maybe let's hold the two crowns up side by side so we can see the difference between them.
I can do this.
Oh, big difference. Oh, like look at that. So I've got a little yellow. I've got a big yellow, little yellow and big yellow there. And I'm going to now make some notes. And I'll sort of show you how I would go about doing this. We'll first do some things, some studies where we're going to record some information from these study skins, and then we'll look at some studies from photographs. Right? But look at how cool this is. The field guide is essentially a big lie, right? There's as much variation in all these critters as there is between you and me. But we'll have in the field guide just one picture. Here's the golden-crowned sparrow. And you get these two side by side, and you're like, ooh, yeah, not so much. Right, so if I want to make a sketch of what I'm seeing there, hold on a second. I am going to.
Renee, I'm wondering if you can check the focus on your camera. It's a little bit blurry, and I'm thinking there might be a way to crisp it up a bit, perhaps. No stress if not.
I can just, let me see if I'll
All right.
work on that, Beth.
No problem. It might even be just as simple as touching your phone screen like you would for a picture. You might try that.
Yeah, but not seeming to change anything, but I'll keep working on that.
We'll do our best with what I have. Right. So the way that I would make some notes about these is I often do in my journals, I do what we call a joint comparison. And that's when I do two things side by side. I'm going to kind of keep the same sort of parallel structure. I'm going to have one bird here. Whoop. Hold on a second. I got to figure out how to get this centered. No, right. It's hard because right is left and left is right on my paper. Okay, so if why can't I make a mark? Here we go. Okay. Here is the top of bird head 1. And here's going to be the top of bird head 2. And so I'm just starting with light, loose shapes, and I'm going to keep this sort of the symmetry of these by drawing a line through them like that. For the beak attachment, I'm giving them both just a little sharp beak in the front. And you can think of these bird heads as being kind of flat across the front and then angling out like that. And so let's see what shapes we get. On the first one, I am going to, I look at just the shape of the yellow. If I draw the black in, I'm drawing that lower one. If I draw the black in, I will be so kind of focused on that I might kind of misinterpret the shape. But this is going to be a narrow kind of U-shaped thing. You'll notice often in my sketches like this, I will make very angular drawings. If I am too focused on following curves. Sometimes my brain actually doesn't pick up. Your brain will just be trying to make a generic curve rather than look for the inflection points that you're actually getting on something. So here is my little spot. I'm going to have this much be yellow. And then I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 little lines of So I'm making some dots in here, and I'm pressing a little bit more forcefully with my pencil as I get to the back. On the front of that, there's a little black V there. That's how I might kind of block something like that in on the pages of my journal. Now let's take that, the one with the bigger yellow patch, and bring that one a little bit more front and center, if we could. So that now you've got seeing the same problem that I was having, that your brain, it's like a reversed mirror. Maybe rock them down so we're looking a little bit more. There we go. Now for this one, I'm first just looking at the shape of that yellow, and that's what I was saying, like this reverse kind of circus tent. There's a little circus tent shape going on there. And its yellow comes out fairly far. And then less distinct lines coming in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 or so. And for this, big black, you notice how I got that sort of shape of the yellow by looking at what artists call the negative shape. I didn't draw in the shape of the black because I wanted to get the shape of the yellow. And then I fit the shape of the black in next to it. That's a really useful strategy for drawing parts of your birds. Just to make these a little bit more fun, I am going to add a little bit of a shadow on one side of the bill. And then on the top side, on the other side, I'm going to put a little bit more shadow in there. It kind of gives you a sense that you're sort of seeing a highlight coming down the middle of the bill there. That's a real difference. Let's take a look on the one with the bright yellow spot and look at the side of its head. Right. So what we're seeing is that there's a little dark line coming down underneath the bill. The throat is pale. There's that little dark line along the edge of what's called its malar zone, between the malar zone and we'll be making a diagram of this in a second. Then there's a pale zone, and then there is up below the eye, you're seeing that white spot. That's its eye because it's filled with cotton. So these are not done to kind of make them look lifelike with a glass eye in there. This is the way that scientists kind of keep their specimens. And you're seeing that those little spots curve around the bottom of that eye. So I'm going to make I'm going to make a little sketch here of and see if I can get that onto. I'm doing the same thing. Oh, there we go. And all right. So I'm to get the same this to be the sort of a normal angle on your screen. I'm having to actually draw mine pointing down. Right. So we've got a bird beak. Different bird species have that triangle of the beak will be thinner or more broad. On these ones, it's a fairly broad seed-eating beak. And the suture of the mouth is coming a little bit closer to the top than the bottom. I'm going to give my bird a slight little forehead and a head coming back. The eye is going to be set in a little bit. There's a space between the end of the beak here and where the eye is called the lores, L-O-R-E-S. And so the eye is going to be right on top of this line, but it's spaced back from the beak there. So that's where my eye location is going to be. This is a really useful distance to look at on your bird sketches. The distance between the back of the head can actually change when it fluffs its feathers out or sleeks them down, but you'll always have a very tight distance between the front of the eye and the back. Birds have a thin line of feathers right around the eye, and we can't really see it on these study skins, but on ones in the field, you'll see that there has a little bit of an eye ring. There's a line that comes down from the corner of the mouth here, and from the back of the eye, there is a patch here that covers up the bird's ear. So the bird's ear is going to be covered up by these feathers here. And that's the bottom side of it is where you're seeing these little kind of dark curls underneath that eye. In this space here, I'm going to put a little bit of just gray color in there. Below the bird's lower beak, there is a patch of feathers that comes down that is on golden-crowned sparrows. It's a pale zone. This zone is called the malar zone. And the lower edge of that, if you look closely on those study skins, you can see that there is a little bit of a dark mark right down there. The throat feathers stick up underneath the bill here. So the bill is actually set into the head a little bit. On the golden-crowned sparrow that is in full breeding plumage, you are going to see a big black zone up here on top. In non-breeding plumage, there's often a little bit of yellow that you'll see above the eye, then separated by dark, and then more yellow on the top of the head. So depending on what time of the year your golden-crowned sparrow is showing up to be sketched, that area can be a little bit different. And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to just sort of peter it out, get it fainter off the back here. Some of these little stripes. Lastly, if I wanted just to add a little bit of color with my pencil here, or value with my pencil, I'm going to shade this ear patch so that the pale throat there stands out a little bit more. There's a nice little dark mark. If you want your birds to look a little bit more lifelike, a fun thing to do is to, if you add a little, I'm going to draw a very pale circle in the eye and overlap that over a darker circle. And then I can make that whole eye dark except for that white part, that little part that I circled. Kind of gives you the look that your bird has a reflection in its eye. I'm going to turn this to a different angle so that I can actually see what I'm drawing a little bit better. No, it's hard to make sense of it when I'm drawing upside down, but it's actually hard for me to also draw it when I'm drawing it upside down. There we go. Let's look just a little bit about the head of the golden-crowned. And lastly, let's take a look at the wing of the golden-crowned. So maybe move your hand. There we are. So on this, you can see an overall brown wing, and you're also seeing those little pale spots. Actually, the other one has slightly, let's try this one. Yeah, there we go. So let me jump over to a photograph. It's nice when you can hold a bird in your hand because you can look at it feather by feather, but sometimes because we're not able to really preen, let me see here. Because we're not able to preen the bird's feathers for it, I am going to share this. There we are. And let's see, I am going to, all right, so here's a photograph of the golden-crowned sparrow.
Jack, if you tap your visualizer screen once, the little frame will go away.
Ah.
There you go.
Oh, thank you, Melinda. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Melinda Nakagawa, host of the Monterey chapter of the Nature Journal Club. Check her out. Melinda, please put a link to any classes you're doing in the chat so people can follow that. Really, really helpful, useful stuff. So I'm going to rotate. Start here, and I want this pencil pointing up. I'm going to rotate my camera down. There I go. Here we go. So if I want to make a sketch of this bird, the way I often will start is I look at the shape of the air right along its back. So you notice the back is at an angle and the head is sticking up. That's a really wonderful way to start a bird sketch. And then I'm going to put a ball in for where its head goes. And here's my little eye beak line. And then look at the angle underneath the neck. It comes down and then it starts to kind of curve out a little bit. So these will be for most birds that I'm now drawing, this is the way that I start those drawings. And then what I do is I can drop an oval in here for its body. And I'll note where its tail comes out. And this bird's wing starts, look over on here. So we see, note about how far down, how far in. This point right here, that's where my wing starts, and it ends here just below the tail. So I will then kind of come in a little bit, and from a point in here to a point below the tail, that is where the leading edge of the wing is. I'm going to draw an oval in this area here just to sort of help me kind of get, there's a big piled mass of feathers. These are called secondary feathers. And they are going to kind of pile in here. And those little white dots that we're seeing before are the edges of these little feathers on the wing called covert feathers. And there's a small row of small ones, and then there's a bigger set of feathers here. And just the tips of those on one side have these little white spots. And those line up to make that bar across the wing. So I am going to just draw a line across the wing where I see the big one and a line where I see the small one. That gives me a nice little framework for my bird. These feathers in these ones here on the wing, these ones with the white tips, those are called covert feathers. And they notice that they're coming down at a slightly different angle than these wing feathers. In a lot of my earlier drawings, I always drew these feathers here pointing the same direction as these. But I now see on lots of birds, these will be at a slightly different angle. So there's a little pearl for people who've been drawing birds for a while. So we can make our greater covert feathers at a slightly different angle. And those feathers, so they're dropping down in here like this, while the wing feathers are coming back this way. I'm now going to add just a little bit of tone onto the wing. And you're going to see that that's going to do a lot to suggest the details of this wing. So I'm going to just draw in some of the dark parts. So on this wing down here, I've got 1, 2, 3 little feathers here. Those are the tertial feathers, 1, 2, 3. They have dark on the side that is closest to the back. And you'll see dark in the middle of some of these feathers here. But on these ones in the front, they're overlapping, so you don't really see that dark very well. So just with a few kind of an economy of marks, I want to suggest this kind of pattern on the wing of my bird. So let me show you what I'm going to do. Is I'm first going to make sure that I leave a white zone. I'm going to draw in some of the darks, dark, 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 and I'm gonna, then it starts to get a little bit more pale as I come forward. And then I'm going to fill in the rest of that just with tone. On the back, so you see how that, you kind of then get the sense like, oh, there are these individual feathers that are coming down here. What about on the wing there? I'm going to put in the dark. I'm going to put in, look at what this dark does. It's going to come down here, and then it's going to slightly almost hook up there. See that little dark hook? It gives you the sense that this is wrapping around that other feather. We're going to do one more like that, kind of coming down. and hooking there. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing the dark parts on that, but it gives the effect of showing the edges of those feathers. Then I'll just drop in a few edges in here. So that gives you this sense of a fairly detailed wing by dropping in a few of those darks deliberately. On the shoulders here, there are some scapular feathers. I'll put in those darks. And then on the back here, I'm wrapping these lines, kind of curving them around so that the back doesn't look flat. And on the lower back here, you don't have those spots. So the lower rump here, where that's exposed, you don't get those. By the way, this photograph is from the website birdpixel.com. My dear friend Vivek Kanzode, wonderful bird photographer, and you can go there for great bird photographs to help you with your drawing. This eye is further away, so I'm just going to put a little highlight in it. I like to put a little hint of almost kind of sleepy marks under the eye. And here's my ear patch. Here's overall gray on the head. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a dusky mark between the malar stripe. Oh, I got a smudgy pencil. There we go. You see on this bird here, the same general patterns going on. And you see this backup one. So those techniques give you a fairly good looking little sparrow. We'll just sort of flesh this one's tummy out a little bit here. I'm going to put a little bit of tone onto the side of the body so that you get that white throat and white center. And the legs come forward. This leg is going to be mostly hidden. There's that little line there. So this is kind of what I call a foot squiggle. I'm going to suggest that there's a foot here. The back claw coming forward. See how sometimes you can get away with just a little. If I get in here and I draw in every toe, often the foot ends up looking way too detailed. And that's a reasonable golden-crowned sparrow there. So if you're new to drawing birds, just be aware that the more you work at this, the better and better it's going to get. And just putting in some pencil miles is going to make a big difference. If you have been drawing birds for a while, we've got this new trick of these covert feathers coming at a slightly different angle in here. We also have the idea of suggesting some detail in the wing by just strategically placing a few darks and a mid value. So this is, we talked before about the 3-value system. you're going to leave some things white, some things a mid-tone of gray, and other things you're going to punch in a darker value. And that's what you're seeing there on the side of that bird. So these birds may be in your garden right now if you are on the West Coast. We're really grateful to Point Blue Conservation Science for helping us get a deeper understanding of what is happening with these species. And there we go. I'm going to jump over to this other view here. That's me. Hey there. Gratitude to Point Blue Conservation Science for helping us get a better understanding of the species and their conservation. If we don't understand, we can't make informed management decisions. And so the basic research that you do has lots of wonderful implications. To be the best stewards that we can be of this planet, we need this kind of research. So I want to encourage people. I know that people on these workshops will often make a donation to support me in the work that I do. If you're considering doing that today, I want to encourage everybody in today's workshop, instead of making a donation to me, to make a donation to Point Blue Conservation Science. If you are able to do so, it's going to make the little donations that you make a big difference in the long term. Science happens because people do it, and we got to feed those researchers, hungry researchers. We don't want that. So we're really grateful to you. What I'd like to do is to bring Anne back in, and the three of us, myself and Renee and Anne, we can perhaps field some questions from you folks about Point Blue, this research, or if you have birdie sketchy questions, we might be able to help you.
And Jack, I just want to thank you so much for having us on as your guests. And I'm just so happy, as I said at the start, to bring these two communities together. So I want to encourage people, if you're not already with Point Blue, join us. And if you're not already with Jack, join Jack. He's got all these great workshops going. You can do this several times a week. Go to johnmuirlaws.com. And he does operate off of donations, and it's really important to support Jack as well. So I just wanted to say that, and hope that we can build both communities together, because the work that we're all doing is so important, and it's getting us through some tough times, and it'll get us through into some better times, both for the environment and for ourselves and for our communities. So thank you. And I did see one question in the chat. I don't know if it got answered, and this would be for Renee. I love these little backpacks that you put on the birds, and the question was whether they affect the behaviors, or do they affect the birds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have looked at, so for every bird that we put a tag on, we do what we call as a control bird, where we band a bird but don't put a tag on it. And we've been comparing the rates of return. Those birds have to fly to Alaska and back. And we've been comparing the rates of return between those control birds that aren't tagged and the tag birds. We haven't found differences in those yet. And that's something that we definitely take very seriously at Point Blue, always monitoring any kind of impacts that we might be having on the birds that we're studying, and always paying attention to bird safety as our first priority. So we haven't detected differences, but we'll certainly keep monitoring those things as we continue these types of studies.
And I'm seeing a follow-up of, how does tracking birds teach you about climate change?
Yeah, well, it's kind of about how climate change might impact birds differently depending on where they are. And so, for example, we're seeing changes in arrival and departure dates for some of the migrant species at the Palomarin Field Station, while other species are not changing their migratory dates. That's something that you could evaluate based on, well, where does this bird spend its winter or spend its spring migration, depending on what end they're going, and compare, for example, are they changing their timing of migration throughout their range, or is it based on, where they are? Is there change in food or change in temperature that's signaling them to move or not move? And so it's a lot about how birds are responding to their environment for us, and to climate change.
Now, it's the there's always the observer effect. What is the impact of of us doing our research on these critters, on the critters themselves. And it's neat to see how you can be really intentional. You are, so that by having that control group, like you're not just saying like, oh yeah, a bunch of these other birds also came back, but before the next season, well, each one has its buddy. And if the rates of buddies aren't coming back, that would really show you that these are having a big impact on the survival of those. There's lots of kind of biases, cognitive biases that we humans have that make figuring things out like this difficult. So part of the process, the methodology here of in advance picking out which bird is the buddy for each one. You wouldn't want to do that when they, after they come back, because then you're just like, yeah, a bunch of these guys came back and they're like, yeah, we're fine. This allows you to be able to definitively say like, yeah, we're not, at this point, we're not seeing an impact on their survival. So respect to you for caring about the birds, not just your data set, but caring about the birds to set those protocols in place. I saw a question that somebody had about the Nature Journal Club, and I'll just answer that for you. So the Nature Journal Club is an international community of people who are doing nature journaling. And what we do is you can follow us online. If you are on Facebook, there's a really active Facebook page called The Nature Journal Club. And you can find us all there posting journal ideas and things. Also, lots of teachers and educators who are offering classes, like Melinda is doing, on how to do nature journaling. You can find links to their classes there. We also, Vale, would you put the link to the community calendar into the chat? So in just a moment in the chat point, we're going to see a link to a bunch of different classes taught by myself and a wonderful collective of other nature journaling mentors who are offering free and low-cost workshops to help people get these sorts of skills. And then the club is where we all get together and share it. During non-COVID times, local clubs meet and actually go out in the field together, and we do this all together. It's a ton of fun. There's no charge to join, and anybody who wants to be a part of it can be a part of it, and you can be too. If there are other questions that people have, I'm going to encourage people to drop those into the chat. Anything that you'd like to know about this research, Golden Crowns, or more about journaling here.
So our esteemed chairman, Jeff Gordon-Creed, just dropped into the chat. What are the basic beginner tools one should have on hand to start journaling and sketching? Because, I think he's hooked. So, Jack?
Right, so the tools for entry, it's a really low bar for entry. You basically need something to write with and something to write on. We find that a journal, so a bound book, is so much better than just loose pieces of paper, because this then becomes an archive of your experiences and memories. So you can look around and find yourself a journal that you like and that you can bring with you. On my website, I have a link of a bunch of different resources. The easiest tool to use then is the Dixon Ticonderoga #2, right? Or just, the standard pencil that we got in elementary school. It works great. It's got an eraser on the end and graphite on the other, and they don't run out of ink. So that's a really useful way to start. People will find that it's also fun to add color in. So a small set of colored pencils is also a useful thing that people will have at the start. And then people will kind of shift it from there. Some people like to go in pen. Right now, I'm doing a lot more stuff in pen than pencil because I like that it doesn't smudge. I wish that it had the shading ability of pencils. It doesn't. But I like that it doesn't smudge. I also like to do stuff in watercolor. So some people are doing stuff in watercolor. Some people are doing just stuff graphite pencil. There's no set of tools that you have to have, but I do recommend getting yourself a notebook that you like to use. I find that bound ones are better than sort of a sewn binding one is better than one with a spiral binding, because the spiral binding ones, the pages tend to smear on each other, especially if you're using graphite pencil. So you probably have around your house the basics of what you need to get yourself started nature journaling. And then you can go from there. Anne.
Yeah, so we have another great question, and thank you for all that on getting started nature journaling. It's so much fun. You should join us, Jeff. But Meryl is asking, Renee probably, could you tell us the importance of having long-term data, why it's important to studying climate change? And also, I want to, maybe you could talk about the journals that are sitting out there at the Palomarin Field Station, and maybe you found some notes from Jack from what, 1984 was it, when you were out there? I mean, these journals go back to the beginning, maybe 1966, and so they were handwritten. We've digitized them. We had to save them from the fire out at Point Reyes Seashore this year, load them up into Subarus and take them away, but they're safe and they're just treasures. But if you could talk about the journals out there and then the importance of long-term data.
Sure. So I'll start with long-term data. So, in terms of studying climate change, these data sets in 1966, when the first biologists at PRBO, Point Reyes Bird Observatory at that time, were starting to ban birds, they probably weren't necessarily recognizing how 40, 50, now 55 years down the line, these data were going to be so useful for climate change, for understanding climate change. Because in order to understand bird response to these long-term environmental changes, you really need long-term data in order to answer those questions, to see, well, what were birds doing back then? What was happening? How does that compare to what is happening now? We can also look at environmental variables like big winter storms or amount of rainfall. How did that impact reproductive success the following year? And we can make predictions based on climate models to what we might expect more in the future. If okay, there's going to be more or less rain or more or less drought, well, how did birds respond to dry years and drought years in the past, and what might we expect? And so having a snapshot from the past can really help you both understand how birds respond, but also make predictions about what might happen in the future. In terms of the journals are just a really fun and great source of data for the field station. There has been a journal entry for every day that PRBO has been an organization. So starting in 1965, but then traveling with us to Palomarin when that became a field station. Every day, the residents at the field station, often the interns, are recording the weather, the activities, a bird list for the study site. There are many sketches over the years in the journal, and they make notes on what happened in the given day. And it's super fun for, you mentioned that Jack's entries are in the journal. I mean, they're there and they're stored there. And, when new interns arrive now, one of the first things they do is go and look at the day you were born, what was happening at Palomarin. So that's always a fun activity, but they're a really great treasure and part of the culture of the field station is really just tracking things in the journal on a daily basis.
Yeah, and there's such a difference between subjective memories and data, right? So data is systematically recorded in the same way over time. So as researchers change at Point Blue, over 50 years, right? As researchers change, they kind of go, they're then locking into the same protocols so that you can compare. It's not apples to oranges. And also, people, the data is also quantitative. People would say, like, these are, I just remember birds were a lot more common when I was a kid. Back in my day, you had, but our memories are shifting sands. The data that they have, you're able to actually say quantitatively, yeah, you know what? There's a lot fewer of these birds now than there were then. And these things are actually declining. And by these are also the patterns in these bird populations. It's over time spans that human brains are not developed to be able to pick up. So if something changes in the next minute, you're going to pick it up if you're lucky, right? But things that are changing over years, people sort of talk about the frog in the pot. You slowly start to heat up the water and maybe the frog doesn't jump out of the pot because it's slow, incremental change. You can't really pick those things up subjectively because your brain just will sort of like, yeah, it's kind of sort of like it was before. Those birds were around. So this allows the scientists to make precise, accurate, rigorous statements. And that's amazing.
So we did get a question from London, from Ray Bonta, was wondering what is the population of golden-crowned night sparrows? And a related question, sort of to what you were just talking about, well, I'll just ask you, like, what would it take, what kind of education and background do people need to become interns or get involved in bird banding? And we have another young person online right now from Latvia, Walters, who does amazing work on bird ringing in Latvia and monitoring, building and monitoring nest boxes and so on. So if you could talk about what the population is and what young people can do to get involved.
Okay, thank you. So first, for the population of golden-crowned sparrows, it's a, I would say, understudied species relative to a lot of species in North America. And, I know some trends that are local trends, but they're not on any lists in terms of like high conservation concern. But I don't know that we know range wide what they're doing. And if I know Diana Humple is on this call, if she knows otherwise, she can maybe add that to the chat. At Palomarin, I mentioned that we're seeing kind of a slow decline, but that likely is at our study site because of the habitat change. We did not pick that up at some of our other sites. In terms of what interns or aspiring interns need to do an internship like this and to study birds, really what we're looking for is people who are excited and passionate and interested in learning. You don't have to have a specific degree to get into this kind of work. The top scientist at Point Blue did his undergrad in English, for example. And so, you can get your training on site. And many of our interns are recent graduates from undergrad programs, but not all. Sometimes people come to the field station in an earlier or later part of their career. So really just interest in learning, a passion about conservation. Those are kind of some of the key things that we're looking for.
Something that I want to point out that Renée just did, that it's a subtle thing, but it's something that I love about scientists, is that she spoke to where she had data and called herself out on where she didn't. So there's so much just kind of arm waving in sort of general conversation about, like, what is going on with things that are outside of our area of expertise. And do you notice that where she didn't have data, she said that she didn't have data. And so she's like, I don't know. And that really good, so you can tell a really good scientist by the fact that they say, that you'll often hear them say, oh, I don't know, right? And sort of, or they'll put error bars around the sorts of things that they're talking about. In sort of general, when we think of sort of people generally communicating like this, it makes people think like, oh, you really don't know what you're talking about. You're kind of giving all these sort of maybe and ifs. But what you're seeing there is actually sort of epistemological elegance, right? Sort of calling yourself out on and sort of backing the statements that you can make up with data and calling yourself out on where you don't have that sort of information. And that's something that I just really love about scientists. So that was cool.
Appreciate that.
We also just posted something for community college students who are interested in getting involved in our STRAW program, which is Students and Teachers Restoring a Watershed. And I reposted that on my Facebook page, so it's Ann Chadwick. And we could post it to the Nature Journal Club if you'd like, but or it's probably also on our website, right? So check that out for if you know some great community college students. So it's not all PhDs.
So Renée, our friend in London, Ray Monto, is wondering about what climate parameters or habitat. You said that your populations at Palomarin on golden crowns are declining. You said that perhaps it's a habitat thing. Do you have any information about what habitats they really like to use, and also about what kind of climate conditions might be better for golden-crowned sparrows? And folks, notice if she doesn't have data, she's probably going to call herself out on that. So, to you, Renée.
Excellent. Good question. So yes, golden-crowned sparrows are found primarily in more shrubby habitats. So you're not going to typically see one in a dense forested area, and nor in a wide open tidal marsh grassland. And so typically in shrubs, both on the breeding and wintering range. But I did mention they're in riparian areas, in the winter habitat, so in vegetation along creeks and rivers and things. They, in terms of climate, they're found throughout the Western North America. They do move south for the winter, so they aren't staying in the most northerly reaches, but it's likely food driving them. So there's probably some bounds of, temperature and where they can get food in specific temperatures, but I can't say exactly what those bounds are, but you know, certainly they can tolerate these temperate winters, and even you know, as far north as Southwest BC and in some mountainy areas.
And are they primarily seed eating and some bugs? Is that?
Yes, exactly. And they, you know, they used to be classified as an agricultural pest because they do love to eat little garden veggies and things like that, and other greens. So so they had a reputation for a little while, but now I think a lot of people just, you know, see them in their yards and accept that they're going to eat a few leaves here and there.
I'm so happy that you also played the song of those, because it is this wonderful kind of sign of the season. When they go away, when they head north from the Bay Area where I live, then there's just like there's this sort of missing moment. I know my parents used to they would like to leave their windows open, and they would look and listen for that specific, the golden-crowned and the white-crowned. They would listen for those calls, and then the golden-crowns would go away, and it'd be this sort of family event in the fall when the golden-crowns came back. They would say, like, look, kids, we can hear them again. And so it would be. So thank you for playing that song for us.
Yeah, I always think the songs of birds and the vocalizations are just another way to get to know these species. You know, they all have their individual calls and songs where you can tune into them in using that other sense, and it's a fun way to experience the environment.
So Jack just posted a wonderful, how long is it, 15-minute session in his Nature Journal Connection series. So if you go to his website, you can find that. And it's on listening to birds and how to go about it just from a very beginner's perspective of, you know, how to start to learn bird songs and maybe make notes in your journal about them and start to recognize. And then if you're lucky, you actually get to see that bird. And then you go, oh, that's that bird that makes that dee-dee-dee sound. And so it's really a fun one, very accessible. I recommend it.
So yeah, the Nature Journal Connection video series is, each week I'm producing a new sort of a short little video that we're gonna make a total of 40. It's a program in cooperation with the Children's Creativity Museum. And they will kind of give you kind of critical building blocks in developing your skills as a nature journaler. And they're developed so that a parent can show them to kids, but also the content is appropriate for adults. And yeah, we just did one on how to listen to bird song and how to transcribe the song that you hear onto the pages of your journal. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, so we are now at an hour and a half, and we are shortly going to be calling this session to a close. We're not going to be going to the usual community cam as we do, but that will be back next week. And we look forward to seeing all of you then. If there are any other questions that people had for Renee and Anne, this is a great time to drop those into the chat. And again, I just want to say thank you, Renee, thank you, Anne, for joining the Nature Journal workshop. It was really fun to have you on. And I've got so much appreciation and respect for the work that you are doing on behalf of birds and conservation worldwide. Want to,
Thank you
if
for
we
having
could,
us.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe if we could put into the chat again if people wanted to become a member of Point Blue, membership information, or if people are able to make a donation to support you and the work that you do, we'll drop that into the chat. And everybody, thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Jack. What fun and great to see everybody. And stick with us. Come back. Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.